Souse us therefore in the powdering tub of thy mercy,
that we may be tripes fit for the heavenly table.
Welcome, Meatsmiths. You are listening to a Meatsmith harvest,
restoring husbandry to prosperity
by the traditions of our fathers.
This Farmstead Meatsmith production is made possible by you. If you like it, please consider supporting our team by going to patreon.com/Meatsmith and donating at a level you'd enjoy giving at. Your gift helps us increase the quality and quantity of all our free media education. Thank you, and happy harvesting.
Greetings, Meatsmiths, and welcome to a Meatsmith Harvest, the podcast where we restore husbandry to prosperity by reprising the traditions of our fathers. I am really happy and pleased to have a friend on the podcast. I'm actually kind of bummed I couldn't get Lauren on today because he also is a friend of my wife, Lauren. But we have Kelsey Fernandez. Welcome, Kelsey.
Hey, thanks for having me. Been listening to this podcast for a long time, so to be on it is an honor.
That's awesome. And Kelsey, Kelsey's been to a couple classes and definitely kindred spirits and philosophies. But we actually, our connection goes way back to, when was that? When was graduate school? Lauren knew you way back at Point Loma Nazarene, right?
Yeah, that was wild. I remember, so I came across your content and saw Lauren on there. And in true, I'm from Southern California, so I'm used to the fact that when I see somebody, I'm thinking, are they maybe an actor from a movies that I recognize? But she had more familiarity to her, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I think some interview you did where you had mentioned her being, or maybe it was a podcast, where she talked about being at Point Loma. And I was like, that's where it was. Because not only, she was a star volleyball player, so that's amazing in a whole nother realm, right? A whole nother lifetime ago. But on top of that, she was also in the philosophy and theology department. And so we crossed paths quite a few times. And it was somewhere between 2004 to 2006 that I was there.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Because that's actually kind of when I met Lauren also.
Yeah.
And were you in the theology philosophy department as well?
Yeah. So that was my major. I initially was pursuing that. I ended up finishing a philosophy degree at Cal State Fullerton. So I went to one of the Cal States. So, one of my quick review on that is I went to a Christian college and became an atheist. I went to a study philosophy at a secular school and became a Christian. So.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Did you study any Aristotelian philosophy there, or what was the focus at the state school?
The focus, so it was more, we did touch on Aristotle in some of the classes, touched on Plato, Socrates, of course, but the ones that really started to shift for me was reading people like Nietzsche and Hume and Hegel, because they came up with some elaborate schemes, but they were all houses of cards by their own admission. And even something like coming across somebody like Bertrand Russell, who's like a modern hero of the atheist movement, and he admits outright that he has to start on faith to get anywhere. And the word he uses was trying to prove induction. So, how do you know what's going to happen in the future because of what happened in the past? Well, that's circular reasoning. So how do you start? And he got to a point where he said, you just have to start. And I was like, well, that's a very insufficient answer. And these are the same people telling me, a person of faith, a religious faith, that they are crazy for starting there. And I thought, well, we're all on the same footing, actually. And that was a quick version of my journey through studying at a state school and just going through the ethics class and coming out and realizing there's no ethics. Nobody here has any answers, I guess, is a better way of saying it. They may sound like it, but
That's so great. I mean, I experienced a similar thing because I went to Cal State Northridge for my
Okay.
graduate in English literature. And that's really interesting that that was kind of your path because that was my same trajectory. I hadn't come into the Catholic Church yet. But still very much into my Protestant faith and reading John Calvin and everybody. But I had it really takes the lowest bar, most elemental philosophical understanding to realize that, like you say, they're all operating on something worse than faith, right? Because faith
Oh,
is a
cheaper for sure.
supernatural infused virtue, right? Like this,
Yes.
we have a much better definition of what faith is. But these
Yeah.
guys, like, it was more literally a blind faith.
Right.
And it's just like, well, we just have to posit this meta narrative,
Yeah.
and we can't prove our proofs.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. So move along.
Right.
It's like, what?
Yeah, and
I feel like,
it would be one thing if they just said move along, but then they have the audacity to critique somebody who comes from a position of Christian faith. And
Yes.
again, I agree with you. I think it's a good call out that we are using the word differently, but maybe a better word is presupposition. What is what are
Yes.
you presupposing before to go in this? Because it just, thinking through some of these things, it was the nature of human knowledge is dependency. You need revelation. That's because you wake up one day. I tell my kids this all the time. You wake up one day. You didn't choose your family, your personality. You didn't choose anything about yourself. And then we have this thing that, I somehow have this free will agency and I can be autonomous, this free autonomous agent in the world. And it's like, well, that's a bad assumption that does not follow from just the reality.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I love about Christian philosophy is it is the only place that fully articulates rationality and takes it seriously. Whereas I feel like the whole modern philosophical project is to undercut some element of reason or any certainty that we have by either questioning, how much we can rely on our senses to give us actual knowledge of reality, or questioning reality itself. There just is no real. So stop, and that's so weak. It's such a cop-out. It is, it's so weak and it's so obvious. And it's so amazing to me that that's the elemental assumption. And then we build huge structures of thought off of that,
Right.
totally unaware of the redundancy or the self-referential paradox that is just at the foundation of the entire structure.
Yeah.
Of even like the scientific method as it's practiced, it's like we still have not scientifically proven that observation and repeatable clinical tests in a controlled environment is a scientifically viable way to determine reality, to determine what is true and real. That's just a leap. We just do that one as a leap of faith. Anyway.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, those frameworks of reality are, I guess the common word is paradigm shift. They are unnerving to a degree when you go through them, but as we were talking about before we started recording it, they help to set the foundation for what we're actually talking about, as opposed to again just jumping in, assuming everything. All the terms we're using are the same, or assuming that our presuppositions are equal. So that was pretty shocking to go through. And similarly, I picked up some Christian authors at that point. My dad, who sent me to Christian college, was really worried that his investment was terribly spent when I came home with all the things that I came home with. And it was good for our relationship because he really pursued a lot more source text authors and church fathers that helped to combat the things that I was coming with. And it gave me hope that somebody had the answers. And I guess it was also disheartening because the churches I'd been a part of, most of them had just answered, you'll get through it. You'll get through this doubting time, and then you'll be a good, faithful believer like all of us went through. So that like they didn't embrace that rationality that you're talking about. So that was a little difficult. But I was thankful for some of the authors I came across, and so that was crazy meeting Lauren at that time, going through Cal State Fullerton, and then taking different trajectory from there. But it's kind of cool to see it, meet up again so many years later.
Yeah. And then, so what happened next? You go to Cal State Fullerton, you get out, and then eventually you make your way into homesteading in California.
Yeah.
So
Right.
how did that happen? That's a journey.
It is. Yeah, it's quite a journey. So I'll try to get through it quickly. But I was one of the first jobs I got out of, or even before, while I was in Point Loma, I think is when I started. I got a job at Red Robin, so free fries. We crushed it. But there, I started in the restaurant industry, and so I got through my philosophy degree and the kind of not patent, but the standard options were teaching or law school. I looked at law school and I started doing some of that and doing the LSATs. I wasn't great at them, one, and two, I was not excited about the idea of what the options were that led me down. So I'd already been in the restaurant industry for 5 years. I figured I'd just stay and see if I could make a career out of it. And I started working at a small fine dining restaurant where I learned about wine. And that was fascinating to me because, well, my favorite part about that is I've been bartending for a little bit. And so I go to this restaurant and I think I kind of know some things. I worked at a decent, nicer restaurant. I wasn't Red Robin anymore. And he had asked me, what do you know about wine? And I said, I know probably if you scale of 1 to 10, probably a 4. And he asked me like 3 questions and completely made a fool of me because the correct answer would have been closer to 0. And that was intriguing to me, though. So it was a challenge, and it was I knew that if I wanted to make a career out of it, fine dining was a way to go, which is fascinating. I'll have to get back to this later. But as an agricultural product, wine is one of the few that people have consistently been able to make a good living on, whereas most other agricultural products, people really struggle. Even on a small scale, on a small scale, you can make it as a winery. But what was more exciting to me about wine as I studied it was the viticulture and agricultural side of it, the production side, mostly because it defied everything else I had been told about agriculture. And what I mean by that is looking and studying, for example, the wines of Germany or France or Austria, these old world European wineries, specifically Germany, they seem to have the longest lineage of going back like 600 years of same family, same plot. Wines have only gotten better. The land has only gotten better. And it's antithetical to everything else I thought that, humans were this virus scourge on the earth. And as soon as you start to be productive on the land, you just tear it to pieces and it's worthless after that. That's all we do. And here these guys are like, no, we're about 15 generations in. The land's never been better. We have this whole family tree of people that have come from here. And those stories were very, I don't know, they kind of resonated with me maybe, where family farm, family practice, and then they send their kids off to do different trades and practices. But the son, usually in the modern times, it's been daughters and other people too, or maybe, not just the oldest son, but historically the oldest son would be the one to assume that work when he was done. And he was that much more talented because he had done, and usually they're studying other trades or other business practices to enhance the family business. But I just thought, wow, from this family farm comes so much productivity, so much industry, which, again, in the world that I was in, it was like, everything has to be grow or die was their thing, and grow at like an industrial scale. So it was fun. I was so thankful that I got introduced to it that way, because a lot of people, especially in California or in the US, get introduced to wine in the domestic sense. And our domestic history with wine is very, very shallow relative to the rest of the world. Like we are just copying what other people have done elsewhere. Whereas elsewhere, they are doing what they have built upon for generations. And that's what makes them exciting, not because they had a really good marketing team. And so that was, so I started in the wine world. I worked in restaurants mostly on the merchant side. in about 2016, I got onto the distribution side, which is a kind of a long story in of itself. But the in the U.S. is a 3-tier system, and it's kind of funny if you look at the history. In the 1930s, after Prohibition was done, the mob basically legalized themselves as a middle third party. So between the producer and the person selling it, you are mandated by law to sell to a middleman. And so those middlemen are huge in the U.S., and they've kind of been consolidating. But I've worked for 2 out of the 3 biggest ones. I work for one right now. And that was where the classes that I started taking and started learning at that first restaurant, I started teaching now, and that's what I teach now too. So I do a lot of that education for our sales force. But again, it was amazing to see how that connection from industry and business side of things to agriculture via the wine world and learning about production. Because, one of the things that was interesting about the buyers of wine is they all of a sudden became, in the last 5 to 10 years, very concerned about the farming practices of the vineyards that they were buying from or the wineries they were buying from, which I found really ironic because they have zero questions about that with almost any other product that they buy, but they're very, very scrutinizing, or about anything in their life, So here we'd have these buyers in LA in particular are famous for only wanting things that are super like natural wines, but then the every other choice in their life, from the food, the cars, none of that consideration is there, or clothing or whatever goods they consume. But the wine is the thing that they say has to be organic or biodynamic or what have you. So yeah, all those production elements fascinated me enough to made me start to think more about agriculture, and it was more of a fringe thing because it was the business side of it. But then I started getting into sourdough bread making, and that was when talking about philosophy, like my definitions started to be challenged. Because the first time I had Chad Robertson's bread of tartine, he's a famous baker from San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had it and I said, I've never had bread before. This is a complete, I've been lied to. This is not, this is completely the thing, and whatever I've had before is not bread, at least not in the same sense. It's kind of like you say a lot where it wasn't a difference of degree, it was a difference in kind. And I thought, that nails it. I think this is different. And it was also a point of interest for me because there's certain kinds of wine, particularly champagne, that use a similar methodology where the champagne is supposed to smell like sourdough because of the process that they go through making it. And so I was learning about it in a multifaceted way, which I started to get really excited about. And then in the whole tyranny of the 2020s, I realized, all right, I really need to start. At that point, I'd been married for quite a few years. We had, I think, at that point, we had 3 kids. We had a child in 2020 and 2021, which was awesome. Oh, wow. Highly recommended. It was great. And thinking about that, at that point we are, by now we're a family. We have a family of 7, so we have 5 kids. And thinking about providing for them and realizing that I had all of this theory of viticulture primarily. And I had this selling knowledge and skill set, but it was very limited in what it could do for me. And so when it came down to essential goods, I think like a lot of people that I've heard the past 5 years or so, taking that journey. We were in suburbia at the time. We were living at my parents' house. We are in Southern California, so we were trying to figure out how we could survive here. And in particular, because again, it was a hierarchy of priorities, and we had our church here and we have our family here, and we knew that, any sort of trading to trade that out would be to monetize those relationships, and I really was uncomfortable with that decision. So I figured I'd see what the Lord would do, what he'd provide for us. And it was amazing too, because when I first moved we moved in 2019, I think, maybe 2018, but the intent was to get a suburban home. We were totally, that wasn't even on the radar, but going through that process, I'm thankful that it took as long as it did, because it really reoriented all of our priorities through that process. And that was when I came across the YouTube channel, started getting into gardening, bought some illegal chickens, illegal because our municipality, not ontologically speaking, but and then it was Justin Rhodes. I came across Justin Rhodes' content, and then shortly after he was featuring you on there. And it was funny because I'm looking at your family pig class and just thinking, this is totally not applicable to me right now, but I need this class. Like, I need this to happen, because it was tapping into something that I thought I knew was, I don't know, I knew I needed to understand. It just simply, if nothing else, as a meat eater, I needed to understand this. Yeah. And potentially, as I saw the world going the way it was, I needed to build an essential skill that I could also feed my family. Was a great way to do this. So, we really, I started pursuing that more rapidly. And so I signed up for your class. I remember looking at it, and it was a big investment, but it was, it was so worth it. It just was being in suburbia. I'm like, when am I going to kill a pig? Out here. And so my wife, I've been slowly bringing her along, because this is definitely not her forte either. So I was like, let me ask her and see what she says. And if she's good with it, then I know this is I got to go. And so I asked her about it, and she said, yeah, if you think it's something that you can do, go for it. And I thought, okay, then I'm in. If she's on board, then this has got to work. So I took the class in 2022, which was kind of wild, because a lot happened in that year. So we got some of those animals. I also joined a herd share out here. We had a small farm called Amy's Farm that you could join and actually milk the cows. So I still am part of that herd share today. So we get all of our raw milk there, where I go milk every Friday morning. Awesome. Which was exciting, because I just opened the floodgates. It's like you're trying to you feel like you're on a desert island initially getting into some of this stuff, and you find one small group of people, and that just branches out. And so now I have a much larger community of people to pull from, which is exciting, because most people think, Southern California, you either move out or you don't do this kind of lifestyle. And it's, the beauty is, with our weather, you can grow just about anything, and you have a lot less of a learning curve with regard to the seasons, just because they are more mild, overall.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I really relate to, feeling like you have to justify learning these kind of skills in a way, at least at first, especially when there's, a class that is not cheap involved, and that pull to learn from the beginning, from the living animal, to learn the full narrative. Yeah. I felt that too. And I remember being asked when I was learning how to I was working on a farm, and because I grew up in suburbia too, zero agricultural experience before 15 years ago or whatever it was. And I remember working on this farm and just talking with someone I was working with, and I remember saying that the slaughter that we were doing on our own, again, also illicitly, not ontologically, but we were doing our own killing of our livestock and selling it. And I said, just without even thinking, oh yeah, my favorite part is the slaughter. And then afterwards, I was like, well, that's weird. What? Why? Why did I say that? Why is that my favorite part? Because we were doing everything. We were raising them, killing them, cutting them, curing them, and selling them, retailing them. And there was I didn't, it just seemed weird that because it's objectively, the killing is difficult. You're covered in fat and blood. It's extremely tiresome. it is it's burdensome in the sense that you must complete the job. Like there are no, once the animal is dead, however many you're doing that day, the inevitable march of harvesting must continue. Like you can't just stop. Oh, I hurt myself. Like no, you must get the guts out. You have to get this carcass chilled. All that to say, it's not like, I would even argue objectively, after doing it for however long I've been doing it, it is not fun. Like it's not a fun thing. It is. It can be fulfilling because anything that is difficult that you do well is a gratifying thing. And I think going back to also what you were saying about wine, just that pull to learn the beginning of the story, to take a couple steps back on the food chain and to think, why do I feel the need to do this? Like what is going on? Is this because I'm a provider, because I'm a father? Is it because I'm just hungry?
Right.
And this is how we eat,
Yeah, and I guess that's a good question to think through. It was one of the things I wrote in the review that I put on there was that it was one of the most human experiences I've ever had. And it's a weird thing to say, but it's the best summation I could give to what that experience was like for the first time. That, for example, it happened to me even just recently. I was sharpening my knives, made a dumb cut and cut my finger pretty good. And I started to get nauseous, from it and that's something I've dealt with over the years. But doing it with a pig was no big deal. Like that, and it cemented in my mind too the differences that are so obviously there when you raise your animals and you harvest them. There's no way I can confuse sentient with human in the same way, right? That distinction is so clear. Even coming from, nobody coached me on like how to process this, or really, you've mentioned it before, talking about with your kids experiencing it, and they've experienced a lot of slaughter with me over the last couple of years, and they don't have a lot of hangups, and even I didn't have as many as I thought I would, being the fact that I came from, more just a modern, postmodern maybe household, right, where you were just completely disconnected from it. But yeah, it was definitely a jumping off point for me. And by the way, I do want to say, looking back at it now, the best return on investment is taking one of your classes. Just gonna put it out there. I know that in this podcast, Lauren obviously comes on oftentimes and says that people say it was life changing. It totally was. Yeah. It was super. You mentioned the narrative. I think that's a good way of putting it. And I wasn't even sure if I was going to use it yet, but I came off just so excited that it was possible. And I think that was maybe, a huge driving force over the years after that, the year and a half after that it was possible. I could do it. You could do it on a small scale. You have to invest, both mentally and physically and financially into these things. But, so I look back on it now and I realize how crazy it was that I wanted to go from suburbia to doing that. It makes a lot more sense. Like if you're into homesteading, even like just chickens, or you have just a little bit of land, that makes sense to make that leap. I was like, I got none of that. I'm going. And I'm thankful, that I did. I kind of trial by fire, which is, I've learned more about myself. It's the way that I approach things. If I believe in it, if I understand that this is something true and worth pursuing, then it's all or nothing.
Well, I mean, you could definitely argue that to figure out the end before you begin is a wise move. It's at least prudent.
Yeah, and even people that got into, I listened to a lot of other podcasts, did a lot of other research, and people that would get into production, that was their biggest hang-up, was processing. That they always had problems with processing, whether it was USDA or custom. The norm is problems. The exception is finding a really good processor who just crushes it for you and does everything the way you want it to. And of course, even if you did get that, they still don't give you 97% or 100% of your hanging weight, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that was just enticing to me. And Yeah, I give from a sustainable standpoint. And so thankful that I had met that people from the herd share. I ended up finding a partner in the herd share who had some land and was willing to, we kind of traded where she said she would raise the animal and I would do the slaughtering, and then we would split the two. And just, it was amazing, the providential, the timeline that happened where just things were falling into place. The first two pigs we got were 100% GOS from a breeder who just got certified and was 2 hours from us, or an hour and a half. And the next closest person would have been like 9 hours away. And so that was amazing that happened at that time. In the research I'd been doing, I was really curious about red wattles and Berkshires from, it's just understanding some nuances with regards to the meat. And if I did want to get into selling shares, it was a consideration. And she was growing all three breeds. So I was like, this is amazing. And then crossbreeding them. So she's willing to work with me on, what we can be produced given those three breeds, which was, again, a huge blessing to come across. So it was, really about 13 months after I took the class that we did a harvest of our first two pigs. And so again, from suburbia and I was still in suburbia at the time.
The poor's head in hand bear I, bedecked with bays and rosemary.
How many people do you know who are building their home culture around seasonal harvest and feasting? Or that are hunting as you are for self-sufficiency and back to the land values? Or that share your artist's passion for human-scale meatcraft? At farmsteadmeatsmith.com, we've created a community of hundreds of omnivores from around the world with these shared goals, and 2 major places for them to learn from and inspire one another. First, we have our semi-annual hands-on educational event, The Family Pig, here at our Heartland Homestead in Oklahoma. Come meet Brandon, get your elbows greasy, and over the course of 3 days, kill, cut, cure, and cook 2 pigs completely. You'll rub those greasy elbows with other meatsmiths from around the country, sharing meals and conversations to inspire you for years to come. Secondly, for more remote learning, over at farmsteadmeatsmith.com, we host a purely digital membership program with an archive of film and textual resources 5 years deep now. And both our on-site classes and online program include access to our most unique and rewarding private community Facebook page, Meatsmith Table, which is the only international network by and for homesteaders harvesting animals on a domestic scale using traditional and regional methods. We've been told that our classes are life-changing and the membership program unparalleled in quality and quantity. To get a taste of our education, search farmsteadmeatsmith.com and our YouTube channel for our free films, conversations, and downloads. Explore how we and other meatsmiths across the globe may best come alongside you and support you in building your home around the harvest. Please head to farmsteadmeatsmith.com today.
But I'll talk about that first harvest because that was amazing too.
Yeah.
Just to be there, right?
So you took the class with no pigs, and then 13 months later, you said that's when you did your first pig on your own.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean,
Okay.
with the group of people who didn't know anything. So basically on my own, and that was wild too because audaciously, I was so excited from what I learned from the class, especially from like Slaughter Day Fry, that I wanted to share it with everybody. This is the coolest thing ever. And so I made the crazy move to have like 15 people there for my first slaughter ever, all over my shoulder, including a bunch of children, And at this point, I had totally saturated myself in everything that you had put out there to just because as an educator, I think it's one of the things I would say too that was so helpful about what you've put out is your willingness to repeat yourself. I mean, I feel like every time you do a live broadcast, you basically are answering the version of the question you've already answered 100 times. But that's what it takes. Like, that's what learning is. Right? Repetition is super necessary. But repetition of things that are simplified statements, because those stick. And then it's not until you actually put your hands on it that you're like, this is why he said that, right? And so all that to say, I'd armed myself with the information and the theory, but doing it is, of course, a whole nother thing. And so, but day one, so we planned to do it. It was a Friday, Saturday that we were going. So we were going to do one pig Friday, one pig Saturday, and we're trying to incorporate butchery. But the way it worked out was first pig went perfect. I mean, she just stood right there at the fence for me. It was a super clean shot. It was so perfect it surprised me. Like I dropped my gun and trying to pick my knife up and get the stick in. But it went perfect. The scald was perfect. It was super meticulous, 150 degrees, 90 seconds, 120 seconds. I go like 30 seconds at a time just to make sure I get it at exactly where I want it to go. And it came off beautifully. And so I'm just riding high on cloud 9 after that day. I did it. We split the pig. We didn't have the best, we were working on limited supplies of materials and stuff. So I'd over those months leading up, those 13 months, I think it was like every month I bought another tool. So like buy the handsaw, then I bought the tub or the burner, buying the gambrel, all the things you list in that tools that you send out for us for the class. And then one thing we just really didn't have the money for was refrigeration. And so we were doing ice chests and we just made it work. And it totally, you can do it. Ice chests and foldable tables, you can totally do it. It's just, you deal with, actually you learn a lot. You learn a lot more almost by having less, right? Less tools.
Absolutely.
Less conveniences maybe. And then second day, I was feeling really good about it. And so I think that day I had even more, we had another group that wanted to come out and see it. And I had a little bit of a nervous feeling anyways going in. I'm like, can it go perfect twice? And it did not. It did not go perfect twice. So that poor pig, one of the things I didn't account for was when you are that close to the pig, your iron sights are about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch higher than where your bullet's going to hit. And I knew that, and I kind of reviewed that in my head day one, but for whatever reason on day 2, I didn't. And so I shot through the iron sight of the right spot, which was already a little low now that I look back on it, but it was definitely low by, the standard of hitting the pig. So I hit the poor guy somewhere in the snout. We thankfully had him in a small pen. And you kind of freeze for a moment. I only had one other bullet that I had to actually load. I wasn't ready to load it because I had already reached for my knife. And so I wasn't exactly sure what to do. But then I figured the bullet's going to be the quickest and cleanest if I can get a shot since he's not running for the horizon since he was in that smaller pen. And thankfully he faced me one more time and he went down the second shot, which was its own achievement, but didn't feel like it in the moment.
No, that's a good point. People they beat themselves up for having to take the second shot, and I get it. It's certainly not ideal, but the second shot, if it's a kill shot, that is a far higher achievement than a perfect first shot, if you know what I mean. Because the amount of self-control you have to exert in that second shot situation is far exceeds what you had to do for the first shot. It's so, if anything, it's this weird paradox. If you're killing a pig and you have to do a second shot, but it's an effective one, you've actually done something more difficult than shooting the pig only once. It's it's this strange paradox.
It is, and I would also say that it's it offers a crazy sense of relief when you hear that pig suffering to them down. And it's a wild thing to experience. I obviously don't ever want to hurt these animals more than I need to as far as for the sake of their death. But learning that side by side was really helpful overall. And I think it was one of those that just throughout this whole process, you have to be willing to fail to to learn something that's hard to do. And, I definitely failed, but then succeeded in that. And it was just, it was interesting though, to experience that second day as a whole. Scald didn't go as well. We were where the burner was. We had some wood chips there that lit on fire. It took longer. We started running out of space. We had this perfect plan, of, we'll start butchering the first carcass after we start chilling the second one. But just, I was mentally and physically wiped. And so trying to butcher at that point was really hard. And again, all of this brand new. I think the only other piece of pork that I bought large was just a pork belly before at this point. So I'd never really done, on my own butchering primals outside of what we did at the class, which at that point was 13 months before. And, it's very different when you're just staring at a large side of animal by yourself and everybody's looking at you to teach them. And I'm like, let's run this YouTube video back for the 15th time to figure out where exactly I'm supposed to cut. But it was a harrowing experience. And then, going through the butchery, which it was funny. It reminded me of our first child, because we did so much research in birthing and how we wanted to do that, because we knew we wanted to go in a natural way, even though we were going to be in the hospital that first time around. And then the baby comes and they put her in her arms, and I realized, now we have to do the parenting part, the raising of this child.
Yeah.
And it was a similar way. I had studied so much of slaughtering and so much of splitting the pig and even quartering to a degree, that my mind just wasn't able to hold in all the butchery stuff at that point. And so, again, no better way than to learn than just going for it. But that was taxing, more taxing than I expected it to be that first go around. So that was the first two.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's especially when you're staring at the pig on the table, there's a real sense in which that's when the real work starts. As difficult as the kill can be, even when you get, proficient at it, it's still a lot of work. But that's when you have, hundreds of pounds of meat to deal with. It's not become food yet. You still have a lot of work to do. And it's like all of this. None of this is a path that you choose because it's less work. That's this other weird thing about it. There's a sense in which it's more efficient, but it's also recklessly inefficient. It just depends on which aspect you're looking at it. To raise a pig at your neighbor's land and go and kill it yourself is compared to transporting animals all over the place, raising pigs in Iowa, killing them in China, and shipping them back, and then shipping them across the country as ground pork is like so recklessly inefficient. It's probably like sinful or something. But
it's got to be
compared to you. Yeah, exactly. It's got to be. But compared to you just doing it, in your garage and figuring out cooling on your own, and the efficiency of you doing that outstrips it 1,000,000%. But it is you doing that essential work.
Yeah,
it's on you. So this is not the easier path, but it is simpler. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it is simpler, and I think that it's like I said before, it's so human, it's so natural to raise a little bit of your own food, and especially as meat eaters, it makes all the sense in the world to understand how to do this. You talk about a lot the fundamental unit of society being the family, which I loved that. That was really helpful to think through it versus what we're constantly told is we're a society of individuals, which is like that. Yeah. No, that's weird. That doesn't compute, and nor does it procreate, right? So the kind of offshoot of that, I think, as far as economically speaking, is that one of the fundamental units of the economy is the family farm. And so when settlement happens, that family farm scale, that home scale is the first thing. And from that branches all of these other opportunities and options, because you need carpenters on a farm, and you need businessmen to a degree on a farm, and you need a product to market, which often starts with the farm, the food, the essential goods that you need. So a lot of that was very intriguing as well, looking to build to build what we had lost, what I noticed we had lost, at least from a philosophy and potentially even theological level of our connection to being human. Because one of the things you mentioned is the reckless inefficiencies, and that struck me all the time being in the world of restaurants, of how inefficient it was to get this meal to this person's table. It struck me too very viscerally when I tried to do my first garden, and it took me like 9 months to get a really bitter salad and like $800. And I thought, this is how do you get good at this so that it's actually a return on investment? But yeah, all that to say, it started that wheels turning for me, and then of course culminating in harvesting some of these animals was that this, you're right, it is simpler, and relative to all the other options of food production, it is efficient. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think what you said about sourdough, because that's Lauren learned, or sort of indirectly, but she learned to make our bread from tartine. We had that cookbook for a while. I don't think we have it anymore because we've lent it out so many times. But so we kind of follow that same method. But you said that it's like, when you first taste that actual sourdough bread that is made with art, right? It's artfully made. You're like, I've never actually had bread before. This is that stuff I've been eating. It wasn't just worse. It was like, it had an ontological problem. It's like, it's not bread. Okay. Stop calling it bread. And I forgot where I was going with that. But anyway, that's what I feel with the pork, with doing your pigs this way. There is, even though the flesh at the supermarket was derived from a pig, if people were apprised of what alterations have been done to that creature, contrary to its nature, from its genetics, even to like adrenal stimulants that they give to it to put on more lean meat. It's not quite steroids, but they feed these pigs paline, which stimulates their adrenal glands, which makes them sort of crazy, so that they'll like, if there's a sudden noise or you open the barn doors too quick, like 15 pigs die of a heart attack. It's ridiculous because they're all so high strung with these adrenal stimulants. But if people saw that, they would see that there's this point where we've allowed this so-called efficiency of our technology to smooth things out and be able to transport things long distances, that it's almost like we've chosen that efficiency over the thing it is supposed to serve. So if technology is supposed to be like this means to achieve an end, right? It would be great even on a home scale. Like, we should be able to cure bacon in a reasonably efficient manner. So we have a knife that helps us do that. That is a tool, that's a piece of technology, right? It makes it more efficient. But the more complex and the more blind we rely upon those technological tools, suddenly they become the end. The use of the technology itself. Yeah. And and proof of that is like, I've never eaten bread before, until I ate this real bread. Like, this is not a pork chop. I don't know what this dry, nutrition-less thing is, but it is not a pig, We've actually lost the ends.
I don't know if it's symptomatic or the source of it. I think it's mostly symptomatic, but the idea that we measure everything in dollars, and that has
absolutely,
with currency, and maybe that's a better way of saying it. We measure things in currency. Currency is not supposed to be a measure of value. The value is the thing in and of itself. The currency just helps to be a means of exchange value for value, and so
it's a tool.
Right, exactly that. But when it becomes the means to an end, it just irks me to no end that as a society we say make money, which I think is totally revealing of our of our system. That's literally what we do. We just print money and make money, and that's you go do this job that has very little, often can have very little, impact, and yet they give you dollars for it, right? And that's just, it's a weird exchange. It's a very dystopian feeling exchange that happens. Yeah. And so being one of the things, even though we weren't, a farm household or what have you, one of the things my dad often told us as kids was, production is the means of economy. Production is a high value. Any sort of production is a highly valued trade or job to be in. And so as a classic postmodern kid, I went into the service industry producing nothing until I found this and thought, okay, I can do that. Because I was really interested in producing wine at one point. But again, I'm kind of limited to where I'm at, which I'm coming full circle on that now because, and maybe not full circle. I mean, who knows? Maybe another 20 years I'll have another edge to that circle, as it were. But what it's making me consider now, having this eye-opening experience of harvesting my own animals, is what else can be done on the home scale that people have always done, and so one of those, especially, I think we talked a little bit about this before, but using scripture as a lens to what it is to be human, seeing the rewards of work and of labor and of God's blessings being food and wine and honey and milk and these great enriching things, as those are the ends. Those are the things you spend your gold on, and the Lord even saying, taste and see that he is good. It's not merely just know, right? There is that sense of knowledge, but it comes, as you often talk about, through the senses. These are the ways that you experience that. A lot of those things were so grounding and helpful to solve these issues that I had, like certain angst built up about the way we lived as a society, but I didn't know what to aim it at or what the resolution was. That was another one, is that throughout the whole process, I got into a lot of what's commonly called conspiracy theory. It's just dealing with trying to make sense of reality, because whatever you want to believe about a conspiracy theory but what they're saying on the media, we know is false. So we know that's a lie, and what we've heard, because it's they contradict themselves all the time. And but what was the solution? It was really disheartening feeling that this world was going into hell in a handbasket, proverbially, and I had no way of changing that. But when I harvested my own animals, I realized this is it. This is the revolution, and it will not be televised. But doing this on a small scale will be. That's the building of society. That's the building of what I want to produce in the world with my family. And all of that was very, very encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's such a threat to our overlords that, like you say, that's not going to be publicized at all, because that is the counter revolution. Like, that is the counter society. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They can sort of coerce and persuade by comfort and by making us attached to certain comforts and conveniences and these apparent efficiencies, and to natural and artificial flavors that are like, I think Jordan Peterson said it, they're like pathologically delicious. Like, it's ridiculous. Yeah. Until you've tasted the real thing, then you realize, it's not actually delicious. But they're like, there's a pathology of addiction built into the food system. Yeah. And if you have an attachment to that at all, then you just like any attachment to any bodily passion that we have to gratifying it, you are a slave. You're a slave of that. And and when that. Because I think that the thing about the family, the family as that irreducible unit of society, proper to that family, at least according to St. Thomas, the family unit is sufficient to supply itself with bodily goods, just the most elemental things. And by that, it's like food, clothing, shelter, and we probably need to add transportation. Those are proper to the family unit. And ideally, you would have a larger society to bring in, things like medicine, other things that you can't produce on your own. But that is sufficient. The family has the sufficient prowess to do those things,
right?
To feed itself. And that's not just nothing. That is civilization. And especially when you talk about like those and proof of that is what you said about the winemakers in Germany, multi-generational, single families that have been doing the same thing for longer than our country has existed. Okay. Right. This is way beyond the scope of our industrial agriculture. This is this is far deeper than that. And so the family itself in a fragmented society of dependent and addicted individuals, I guess it's like Chesterton says, I think it's Chesterton, that the most extraordinary thing is an ordinary man with his ordinary wife and his ordinary children, just fulfilling the duties of their state. Just having children and educating them and supplying themselves with a sufficiency of bodily goods.
Yeah, and that's a proof of that is if you do that in this world right now, you are offensive. Without even trying to be, you could be the nicest person, but introducing that you have many children and that you farm, there's a few people right now that are like, wow, that's really cool. But for the large majority, especially, the cities out here in California, people can't even compute. Like they really struggle. One of my good friends from church, he had actually somebody recently when the person met his wife or interacted with his wife, and she has 6 kids, and they live really far out in the boonies because that's the way that they could survive. They didn't want to have a mortgage, and but they commute pretty far. And in a brief conversation with a stranger, that person started crying for her, thinking that she was just so oppressed, And he was looking at her like, what? Why is this offensive to you? I'm living my life. I'm doing an ordinary thing, right? This is what husbands and wives do. We provide for ourselves. We have zero, not zero, but such little impact on whatever it is you're worried about, welfare state or any of that stuff. It's like, I'm just inoffensively living here, but it is totally offensive to the postmodern mind. But yeah, it's wild to see, one of the things, how far we've come. I was going to finish that thought, but one of the things I wanted to touch back on is real bacon, which is sad that you have to even say that. But tasting those things, I think one of the things I did love about the world of wine was that it did teach me a lot about challenging my likes and dislikes, because I love it as a lens for helping people to see this. Because when it comes to food, they assume that they are, complete. They're totally authoritative over their likes and dislikes. They're autonomous, the flavors that they choose. Yeah. But when it comes to wine, people humbly come to it, and they're all of a sudden, well, I don't know. I kind of like this. I kind of like that. I'm not really sure. But they come at it with a very humble attitude relative to food. And so it's been helpful for me to have, especially with the people that I know from the wine industry, to give them some bacon, for example, because for me, the first time I had it, it was good, but it wasn't good because I was it didn't excite my palate the same way that you mentioned, Jordan Peterson calling it pathologically, right? And it was. I just gave it to a friend recently. He used to work at a Michelin star restaurant, and so he's supposed to be one of the pinnacles of tasting some food and being able almost a master at it as well, at least as far as his experience was concerned.
Yeah.
And yet he admittedly had never had bacon, and so it was. We were kind of laughing about that irony. You've had some of the best food experiences in the world, and yet you haven't had one of these most elemental ingredients that people swear by. And we had discussed it in regards particular to a chef we had known in our industry that he previously worked for a food company who would find ways to get a flavor reduced so minutely such that if you added 0.01% of it to something, it would change the flavor. But because it's 0.01% or less of an additive, you don't have to put it on a label, right?
Yeah.
And so he was laughing because I gave him, or he was just tickled by the fact that I gave him some bacon, and he's like, I've never had this before. And he made a good comment. He's like, it tastes like animal. I'm like, yes, that's what it's supposed to taste like. And
Yeah.
and he said, I realized that it was a revelation that I've only had bacon flavored bacon, not, or, pork, bacon flavored pork, as opposed to the real thing. And
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, that's a good revelation to have, that now you can start to go down that path of challenging them even further, because, some of the flavors are intense and they are, but they're just so different from what we're used to. Again, same thing. If you just look at the two different wines, like a really well-made French wine from a traditional producer versus a California wine from a more modern producer, they could use the same grape variety and even a lot of same winemaking techniques, but they're going to be radically different. And the major one is that most people, the easiest way to I try to explain it to people who are new to it, is French wines have a lot of texture and they're coarse, and they like a bit more bitterness to them. There's a lot more going on, and it's not merely this smooth, sweet feeling drink. But yeah, that's very similar to how I've been able to try to explain when I give my meat to somebody, or a sausage or something like that, that just be prepared. This will be a little bit different. And it should be delicious, but for a lot of times it can be so different that it's hard for them to comprehend.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that is actually not an option for us. Because like you say, it is what we're accustomed to. Because you could take that argument and just kind of reverse it back on the highly processed foods that are, scientifically calibrated to pathologically stimulate our taste buds. Even that is acquired. Like I think all tastes are acquired, and it is simply part of our nature as being rational creatures. It's the burden of being a rational creature, is that we have all of our senses that have as their object particular goods, and especially the sense of touch, which I think taste is a subset of. We want things to taste good or feel good. Their object is the good, some good of some kind, but we're not like a pig or like a dog or like a cow that has this self-sufficiency by its own nature in itself to just, not going to eat that poisonous plant, I'm just going to go munch on this one. And it has this instinct, which is totally different than us. Like, we do not have a self-sufficiency we by necessity, we do not have that instinct. So instead, we have an abstract knowledge that we need to eat food. We have like a philosophy, that must nourish self. Yeah. And we have to actually think about it. We have to. And which is why you can't just like walk off naked into the woods and survive. Like, you're going to die. I'm sorry. You have to have this knowledge. And so all of our self-sufficiency, unlike all the creatures, is 100% our self-sustaining, in acquiring the good that sustains our life. It's totally mediated by reason. And which means art. Yeah. Like, it's all art. We're not just filling the calories, we're not just filling the feed bag. And I would even, like a cow might be, just go eat the color green and sit there and ruminate on it and then do it again. It's, we have to treat everything with art. And I know I keep reading this quote, and I've probably done it too many times on this podcast, but it's so good. It's from Avicenna, who was actually, Moorish, and or he was part of the Ottoman Empire, but he was a peripatetic philosopher. He interpreted Aristotle very acutely, and St. Thomas refers to him a lot. But he's got this great line, and it's exactly that argument, is that animals have this sufficiency in themselves to acquire things, whereas we do not. And it's that, he says, is actually part of the nobility of our nature. And it's because we have to add certain things that we have by nature. We have to prepare our food and our clothing. Like, that's why, our clothings have pattern and art and reason, And he says, for raw food not treated by art is unbecoming to man.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I like that.
I just love that.
Yeah, it's, again, I don't know if we'd mentioned it quite yet, but, again, looking at the world through the lens of Scripture, and one of the first things that just helped me with that is that if it is actually the Word of God, it is true revelation, and so we don't need to torture it to make it fit our modern society, our postmodern society. We can take it and understand it because it is written to humans by a God who created humans. And so then you realize, for me, one of the impactful revelations with that was the assumption of the readers that they understand agriculture, from the very beginning to the very end. And so you have, from the very beginning of the fall, of them being clothed with animal skins. And you have this assumption that Cain knew that he was to bring an animal sacrifice. And you have this, from the very beginning to the very end, with the Lamb of God being the major picture of Christ. It's, you just can't get away from it. You can't read too many pages without seeing agriculture all over the place, and particularly animal husbandry and slaughter and butchery of those animals and eating them. And so, thinking about the world through that lens has helped me, I guess, not process, but to kind of go forth with confidence that this is a good path to go down, and it's a worthy cause, because it's not, like you've talked about before, you're not swimming upstream when you're doing this. You're actually going with what it is to be human.
With your own nature. And that's why I think that, that's, we can't look at pigs and say that they do agriculture. And I don't know, the honeypot ants don't count. When they put away nectar and it's cool. And it's analogous to human activity, but it's not on the same level as the culinary arts. We do this it's not like because we're haute cuisine or something, or because it's an artificial self-entertainment. It's actually this is grounded in human nature. If you have reason, it's because you don't have fur and fangs. You have reason instead. And so that is how you get your basic bodily goods, is by the use of reason. And reason is, it's elemental part of the image of God stamped on all of us. And so this is, of course, hopefully it's going to aspire to the true, the good, and the beautiful. And this is why we have, hopefully, beautiful clothing and delicious food. And it's just elemental to human nature. We can't opt out of it. I guess we can. We are the one weird being that cannot fulfill our own nature, right? Unlike pigs. The pig is always going to be piggy.
Right.
But that other power of our soul, in addition to reason, is that will. And we can decide to actually be inhuman. And
This conversation will be continued in a forthcoming Part 2 episode. Thanks for listening, and peace be with you.